All right, welcome to history class, where today we will be discussing the question of what is history? What does it mean and how do you do history? Okay, let's dive right in. So, first, before we get too deep, before I just give you information, I want you first to think about this question. What is history? What is your answer to this? Go ahead, take a few minutes, write your answer in your notebook. Give yourself time and an opportunity to come up with an answer independently. And then, if you have a partner available to you or a small group, go ahead and share your answer, but do give yourself time to come up with an answer by yourself. Go ahead and press pause and play when you're ready, when you have discussed with your partners or groups. Okay, did you do it? I hope so. A big part of getting the most out of this lesson is by actually doing the mental work and being active thinkers instead of just passively taking on the information. You're not going to remember much, and it's not going to make as much impact if you're not really going through the questions and answering them for yourself. And then if you have the opportunity, discussing it with others. So you have your definition of history and maybe your partner's definition of history. Before I give you the definition we will go by in this class, I want you first to go ahead and see how these two things can fit into your definition. And if you need to adjust your definition based on what I'm about to show you, you can go ahead and do that, okay? But first is this quote by Mark Twain. And Mark Twain is a very famous author of American classics. For example, he wrote The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Okay. And he said, the very ink with which history is written is liquid prejudice. The very ink with which history is written is liquid prejudice. Think about that for a minute. And in this context, when he's saying prejudice, I do want to explain that that means it's a tendency to favor one side over another, or just a tendency to prefer to like to believe one thing over all other things. Okay. That's what prejudice means in that context. So take a moment, just think about that. Look at your definition, see if it fits. If it doesn't fit, I want you to think about, what could he possibly be talking about? Then the next thing I want you to do is to look at this picture and just ask yourself, well, how does this relate to history? What is going on? Okay, so go ahead, take a few minutes, think about these two things, try to adjust your definition if you have to. And if you feel like it fits really well, go ahead and explain how each of these two things fit into your definition of history. Okay, take a few minutes, write your answer in your notebook, and then discuss with your partners. And then go ahead and press play when after you have discussed. You can press pause now. Okay. Hopefully, you had a great discussion and looking at this. So, let's go ahead and dive right in. Okay. So, I know the most common usage of the word history is when we're saying history is the past or everything that happened in the past. Okay. But when we're talking about history class, it actually means it's the study of the past. Okay. The past itself is not the same as the study of the past. Okay, it's completely different. So, in history class, when we're talking about the word history, we're talking about the knowing of the past, like how we know it by study and inquiry or investigation. Okay, like how the past is told to us. Okay. But then the question is, how is knowledge of the past formed? How can we know what actually happened if we weren't there, right? That's actually the job of historians. That's what they do. Um, and those historians end up writing books and they write the textbooks, right? But then again, how do they know what actually happened in the past? Well, they play detective, right? Again, it's like an investigation. They go ahead and look at all of the evidence, the sources, the things that have been left from the past by the people that were there, and they try to put things together and see if they can come up with a good full picture of what actually happened. Okay. And this is where that picture of the blind men and the elephant comes into play. It's like if a crime were to have happened, right? Like if we're talking about, we're going back to that metaphor of detectives of the past. Well, what do detectives do to figure out what actually happened? They interview witnesses, they look at for footprints, fingerprints, things like that. And that's what historians do. They do the exact same thing, except for they're looking at things that actually happened, decades in the past or hundreds of years in the past, some even thousands of years in the past. And so the way they do things are going to be a little bit different because their evidence is not as fresh. These blind men represent their evidence, their witnesses. These blind men represent the witnesses that our historians are interviewing, right? Or they may represent individual pieces of evidence from the past. So, for example, say there's a historian studying the Civil War and they found a diary of a soldier and they're looking at this diary to know more about the Civil War. Well, is that diary going to give him a full picture of what actually happened during the Civil War? No way, right? It's only going to give him a sense of what that soldier experienced, right? And even then, it wouldn't be everything. Um, and so, a historian, to get a fuller picture of the Civil War, they'd have to go and seek out, like maybe photographs or diaries of medical professionals or the tools that they use, diaries of Lincoln and of just the different laws that were passed. So each of their sources, each of their witnesses are like these blind men that can only explain what they are experiencing. They don't have the full picture, even though they were there. It's like if you were at a party, right, or a family reunion that you attend, what you see and what you experience is going to be completely different from what your friend or your mom or your sister experience. They are going to be talking to different people, going to different places within that party, within that event. So, a historian really need to look at multiple perspectives and gather lots of different evidence. And what does it mean to study the past specifically? Well, they need to be able to source the evidence and contextualize. Like they need to know when they get the diary, they need to be able to say, based on the information here and how it looks, I can see that this must be from a Union soldier during the Civil War. So that's how they source. And then contextualizing is basically they're understanding the time, the place, the people, the situation. They're able to understand as much as possible what that Union soldier was working with and maybe where that Union soldier traveled. They do that by studying other sources and evidence, okay? And they're looking for multiple perspectives. We talked about that. They need to be able to take and connect evidence from a variety of sources. Um, they have to make logical conclusions based on the evidence. They have to determine cause and effect. They have to communicate their findings. Okay, but their time, their efforts, and their knowledge are not infinite. They are very limited. Okay, so what do we need to be aware of as we listen to or read the narratives historians have created about the past? And I just want you to think about these pictures here. What do these pictures have to do with that answer? Go ahead and take a minute, pause this video, write your answer in your notebooks, maybe discuss with a partner, and then press play when you're ready. Okay, so it's like Mark Twain said, the very ink with which history is written is liquid prejudice. These historians, they have a limited view of the past, whether they're trying to be biased or not, whether they're trying to be prejudiced or not, they are naturally because of their limited time and efforts and resources. It's like if all they had were what the blind man told them, right? Back to this picture. If all they had, if you take the elephant out of the picture, because historians don't actually know that it's an elephant, right? Like if the elephant represents the actual events of the past, and a historian wouldn't be able to see the elephant. They would only know what the blind men are telling them. And so, do you think the historians would necessarily figure out that it's an elephant? Right? Probably not, right? If they're really good, maybe. Okay. Um, but not always. They can only show us what they know. So, for example, you might have a historian who could be a tour guide the way a hiking tour guide is, right? Like they can show you like the leaves that grow on the trees and the mushrooms that are growing in the ground, but they can't show you a full picture. They're only showing you what they know and the path that they know really well, right? But then you might have another historian that's taking you on a bird's eye view, like an airplane view of the past or this event that you're studying. And you're looking out the window of the airplane and you can see how it fits in with other events or other things that happened around the world, but it's not going to show you like the blades of grass or the mushrooms growing in the ground and the birds in the trees. Okay, so these different historians will have different perspectives and expertise based on what they studied. Okay, and so they're like these tour guides. So, what does that mean for us as students of history? How do we then study the past? Well, we don't have enough background knowledge the way historians do. They've studied these things so much more, like for decades, the ones that are really established. And we're only like in high school or middle school. And so, what does this mean for us? Well, we have to rely on these professional historians. We have to rely on them, okay? Like we can do as much as we can. We can study primary sources, like the actual evidence that were left by the people of the past from the past, right? Get into that activity of being a historian, but we're not going to be able to know everything about it. Like we can't contextualize it the way a professional historian can. Okay. So we are very much dependent on them. However, we know that they have limitations. So does that mean we take their word as law? I want you to pause the video again here. And as you pause, I want you to think about this question. Knowing the limitations of historians, then what do you think we can do as students to have a fuller view and understanding of the past? How can we take it a step further than these historians? Okay, go ahead, take a few minutes, think about your own answers, and then discuss it with a partner, and then press play when you're ready. All right, I hope you did that. Let's go ahead and see. Well, the big thing is we are going to want to look for the multiple perspectives, but you yourself, you should look for the multiple perspectives, not just multiple perspectives of the people that were actually there, but the multiple perspectives of historians. Look for multiple historians and multiple sources and make sure that they're all saying pretty much the same thing, or if there are any varying opinions about the same topic. I think that will help you understand better if you can at least listen to multiple sides. You are also going to need to be able to think about cause and effect. That's a big part of history. You're going to analyze the conclusions that historians come to, right? And then you need to look at the evidence that they present to explain those conclusions. Is it enough? Right? But then I want you to challenge that information. And I always want you to look for what's missing. This is the evidence that they presented, but could there potentially be conflicting evidence that they might not be showing me? And that's why it's so important to look for different historians and different sources of information, not just different primary sources, but different secondary sources. And then you are going to want to be able to develop your own arguments, whether you're restating and elaborating another historian's argument because you are strongly convinced that they are right, or maybe you're putting together evidence from multiple historians that might not agree with each other and then developing your own argument. That's a really good skill to have, right? Like where you're trying to make sense of the evidence on your own. And finally, it's just so important to really work on communication, to be able to communicate your findings respectfully and have a productive discussion with someone else, right? A big part of learning is having a conversation, having dialogue with someone else who's also studying the same topic that you are and might not agree with you, right? Like those difficult ideas, those controversial ideas, you really want to wrestle with that with someone else because that's how your mind expands. Okay. And that's how their minds will expand. And that's how we build each other up. And that's how we can build a greater base of knowledge and something that will be more accurate and expansive. I hope that this lesson has been helpful to you and that it will help guide you as you go through history class for the rest of the year. Until next time, I hope you have a wonderful day.